Hi, James Proctor here, Managing Director of the Inteq Group, and the focus of today's video is the quantum dynamics of the current state of a business process. Now, stay with me here. That sounds like kind of a heady, even pretentious, perhaps even provocative title for a video regarding analyzing the current state of a business process. But actually, there's some interesting concepts in here. And so I'm going to give you a little backstory here, then we'll kind of get into it, and I think you'll come away with some valuable takeaways and insight. Now, I was having a discussion with a colleague recently, a couple weeks ago, and that also has a background in the concept of operations research. Now, what operations research is really the quantitative analysis of business and industrial systems and processes. And so through that discussion, we got into a discussion of something called Markovian dynamics and Markov chains. Now, we don't need to get into the detail of that, but really the overarching concept of that, at least how it pertains to the concept of analysis of business process, is Markovian dynamics and Markov chains really deals with how the history of a particular system or process, what is the impact on the history of that particular system or process on the future state design of that particular process. So that kind of sets up the discussion I want to have here on how to think about what I call the current state of the current state and the history of the current state of a process and its impact on how we think about the process going forward in future state design. So a simple example here kind of illustrates the point. It's a classic example called the drunkard's walk. And the concept of the drunkard's walk basically says a particular person, a drunkard, exits a bar, and they start stumbling down the street, right? And so you look at each stumble and analyze each stumble down the street and trying to determine kind of each stumble, what is kind of how to the left or right of center of each stumble to see if there's a certain pattern in there. So after observing a number of stumbles and measuring the left, or how much degrees left or right of each stumble you are from center, you find that it's kind of random, right? They stumble a few degrees this way, that way, but there's no underlying pattern. Perhaps you picked up a pattern though. Maybe a different drunkard walks out, and they tend to maybe stumble, a few degrees left, more so than right, and you start seeing a pattern in that particular stumble, and so you can maybe predict the future stumbles down the road from that particular pattern in the stumbles. So the question becomes how many stumbles, the history of the stumbles, and these kinds of things. Then you can do some root cause analysis, maybe, and look at, well, maybe that particular person has maybe a particular, their knee is a little bit aching or so. I don't know. But the point is, you're looking at the kind of the history of the process or the system to predict kind of some future states. All right, so that's the concept of the drunkard's walk. But we can start applying that kind of thinking and Markovian dynamics to the concept of thinking about the future state based on the current state. But the question then becomes how deep into the current state we want to go. Now, I've established in other videos it's very important to understand the current state, but I'm asking in this particular video, how important is it to understand the history of the current state? In other words, how did the current state of the current state come to be? And so that becomes the more interesting question. And how deep in that kind of analysis do we need to go to help to if you will, inform the current state in order to help us think about the future state? Okay, so let's continue with that discussion. Let's extend the discussion because this is where this particular video is interesting and particularly useful to you. Because what we want to do is really ask ourselves the question, does the current state matter? Does the history of the current state matter? And how does all that matter and influence and guide our thinking about designing a future state? Now, before getting a little more detail, going into more detail on that, I encourage you to go to the website and download a particular white paper I did actually a few years ago. It's called the 5 Essential Business Analysis Questions. Right? But let me just go over 3. We go into the white paper goes into a lot of detail, but I just want to briefly go over 3 of the 5 questions because that's going to give us insight into thinking about what we're about to think about here. Okay. So question number 1 of the 5 questions is really the current state question. What are we currently doing? Right? What are we doing? How are we doing it? So classic current state analysis. Question number 2 of the 5 questions is asking the question, of the things we're currently doing, right? That was question number 1. Of the things we're currently doing, what are the things we're currently doing that we don't need to be doing going forward and we just need to stop doing? And really question number 2 is really about leaning out the process, looking for the non-value added activities, low value added activities, and just eliminating the things that don't add value, right? So now what does that leave us with? Well, question number 3 is now saying of the things we're currently doing, right? That's question number 1, that we want to continue doing, because in question number 2, we eliminated things we don't need to continue doing. So in question number 3, we're left with things that we're currently doing that we're going to continue doing going forward. We just want to do it better. Now, here's where it gets interesting. It's been my experience that about 95% of what you're currently doing, you're going to continue doing. And a lot of people kind of get shocked when I say that, but think about it, right? It's not like, I don't care how aggressively you're re-engineering your business process, new technology, all these kinds of things. You're still going to be, if it's customer billing, you're still about 95% of what you're doing in customer billing, you're going to continue doing going forward, but you can do it much more effectively, much more efficiently, using a lot of automation and all these kinds of things. So here's the point I'm trying to make right now, is if 90%, 95% of what you're currently doing, you're going to continually doing into the future state, I think there's a strong case to be able to say that the current state really matters. Because in order to move to a future state, I got to know the current state. I just can't ignore the current state. But I'm going to go one step farther and say the history of the current state matters a lot as well. In other words, how did the current state come to be the current state, and how can we use that information to kind of influence and inform the future state? Now think about that a little bit, right? Because as BAs, part of what we want to do is look at the current state and look at the history of the current state. What are the drivers that got us there, and what are the pressures and the constraints, technological constraints and resource constraints that got there? What are regulations and all these kinds of things that drove us to make certain decisions about the current state? Because as we move from the current state to the future state, we can challenge those regulations. Do they still apply? What are new regulations coming into play? Do we have different pressures and constraints of other things as well? What new technologies are out there, right? Because we had to do certain things in certain ways maybe in the past, and maybe we're doing certain things in certain ways and never really challenged it, but now it's time to challenge it. Think about it. Right? We kind of separate rules-based work from knowledge and judgment-based work, because if it's rules-based work, right, much of what we're currently doing, because 95 of what we're currently doing, we're going to be doing in the future, but maybe we can automate a significant amount of that, right? We've got robotic process automation, right? That's a very powerful technology today. AI, right? AI is doing is taking an increasing role in process and automating processes. Think about this. We separate knowledge and judgment. RPAs, robotic process automation, is doing a great job of automating kind of the rules-based work, but now we can, even with artificial intelligence, move more into the knowledge and judgment-based kind of work. So the point I'm making here is the current state matters, and the history of the current state matters a lot. Both of them matter a lot in terms of informing and guiding how we're going to think about moving into more of lean, effective, efficient future state. Okay, real quick before we move on to the kind of the wrap-up conclusions here. If you like what you're seeing so far in this particular video, please hit the like and the subscribe button. And actually, I'd really appreciate it if you would maybe put in a comment. If you like it, put in a great comment. If something you don't like about it, put in a comment as well, because those comments that you add really show engagement on the video, and that's what the algorithm really likes, right? The more engagement that the algorithm picks up on, the higher it's going to rate the video. It'll help ensure that these videos keep coming your way and keep coming faster. So like, subscribe, and please leave a comment. Okay, let's continue and wrap up this particular video. Okay, so the question then now becomes, how far back in the history of the current state that you need to go? And the question is, the answer is, right, it depends. I don't know. But as when I say I don't know, you really just got to keep peeling back those layers, right, until you get to the place of understanding the current state from the historical perspective, so you can look at constraints and the backgrounds and experience to help influence and inform thinking about the future state. But as a high-performing business analyst, right, you know, it's a judgment call, and it's a judgment call you'll be able to make. Now, another point I want to make here is, you know, once you have a good, solid current state map, right, a current state map we've dug in and take a look at some of my other videos and blogs in this particular space, and you know, get a good current state map, one that's you've gone through multiple iterations, you really understand the current state, and it's been verified and validated by the subject matter experts. You know, then you're in a really good place to ask the why questions. So I'd encourage you, if you haven't already done so, go ahead and, you know, go to the website, go to the Knowledge Hub, and download the 5 Essential Questions white paper, because that's going to give you very deep insight on how to kind of think about how to ask and how to, you know, ask those why questions. And also, while you're out at the website, take a look at my business process modeling and analysis training course, and take a look at my business process reengineering training course as well. Okay, James Proctor signing off, and I'll see you in the next video.